Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to my channel and welcome to part two of my video series on Wade Wilson. So in my first video, I went over the major planets and their signs and what I felt that they said about Wade Wilson, his energy. And today I'm going to go into the aspects. So Pluto in his chart is doing an awful lot. So I'm going to really dig deep here and get very psychological and explain to you what I think is going on astrologically for Wade Wilson in his natal chart and how these aspects are creating some of the behavioral patterns, certain things that we're seeing from him. If you are into true crime and you're into astrology, you want to learn a little bit about astrology, how it relates to true crime, please like and subscribe to this channel. And I am available for personal readings. If you want to click on my description, there's a link there to email me to contact me for a reading. So this is also, just to mention, this is a progressed time that I have come up with for Wade Wilson. So this is not a verified birth time, but I think given the progressions that I've done, I think this could be an accurate birth time for him or an accurate approximation. So I am going to be discussing the houses in this chart as well as the aspects. So let's start with Pluto opposing his sun. This is also involved in a kite that he has, which I'm going to talk about a little later. But first, I just want to cover this opposition. So, first of all, I think it's really important that Pluto is in the first house here with this birth time. So, Pluto in the first house could be associated with control in terms of your body, your appearance, how you want to show up physically. So, Pluto showing up in the first house could manifest as a real need to control how others see you or experience you. And identity could be built around evoking a particular response from people. So, for example, in Wade's case, I went into a lot of his tattoos on in my first video, but a lot of those tattoos, like the stitched on smile, the swastika, they could be seen as a deliberate construction to provoke fear, dominance, or shock in others. So it's like a Plutonian mask that kind of tells the world, you will experience me on my terms. Now, with his sun in the eighth house, one could say that his core identity has gotten quite buried. The eighth house is a hidden house. So it's one of three houses that are hidden to us, to the person who has the natal chart, because we have the vantage point from the ascendant. So we cannot see what is in houses 6, 8, and 12, technically 2 as well. And so if you have planets, especially in the 6th, 8th, and 12th houses, you may not you may not identify with the planets or the energy in that house as much as you do the planets in other houses because the planets in those houses are hidden to you. You can't really it could be a bit harder to access them, to harness their energy. So a sun in the eighth house may represent an ego that must be hidden in order to survive. So there may have been early experiences that this person had that led them to feel like my core self is unsafe or inadequate, and it has to be buried. I can't reveal it to anyone. Now, that's a pretty generalized statement, but when you have Sun in the eighth house opposing Pluto, it could really fit. So it's like his ego becomes replaced by Pluto, which acts as an armor for him. And remember that his sun is at 29 degrees of Taurus here. So it's the ultimate expression of Taurus. This is the last degree of Taurus before it flips into Gemini. So there's almost an urgency when it comes to doing Taurus traits, expressing Taurus themes. And what is Taurus concerned with? Stability, security, having enough resources, but also safety, like feeling safe in terms of resources and also the body. Because the second house, it's also the first house is about the body, but the second house is really could represent security around one's physical being. Um, and so, with a sun at 29 degrees in the eighth house, someone could have a real fear around control, security, someone potentially having access to their body against their will, which gives him even more reason to hide his true self. So, if the sun cannot exist safely, and especially here in that it's opposing Pluto, there could wind up being a real hollowness, like a real emptiness at his core, because it's so, like I said before, it's so buried that he's not even in touch with it. And so this could come off as someone or represent someone who has traits of a narcissistic personality disorder. So if you're around someone who has NPD or traits of narcissism for long enough, you'll find that underneath the charm and the performance, there's not much there to connect to that's substantive. It's like they're a bit of a shell. And that would kind of be the case here because his identity is basically being outsourced to Pluto. That's how well hidden it is from him, as well as it is from other people. So, with Sun opposing Pluto in general, someone may experience the two planets as two competing identities across a polarity. So, someone could feel that they are between two extremes here and that they could tend to feel they are the victim or that they must destroy others before they get destroyed in the process. So if you just watched my video on Nancy Guthrie, she is also someone who happens to have Pluto opposing her sun. And we could see how different, Nancy Guthrie and Wade Wilson are from each other. I mean, I don't know much about Nancy Guthrie, but presumably she is not a criminal. She is the victim of a crime. So now you can see how much this pendulum can swing. Someone can really represent either side. With Wade here, if it's true that his ego, his core self, is buried in the eighth house, Pluto is more or less going to win in this configuration because first of all, Pluto would be in his first house. So the power is so much more accessible to him there. It's embodied. And the power he feels here is going to feel much safer than feeling vulnerable. Again, planets in the eighth house are very vulnerable. There can be a real fear of exposure. So this is why I think in Wade's case, he tends to be on the side of Pluto most of the time. Now, I do want to say it's not impossible for someone like him to rescue the sun, to kind of heal from, trauma or to really, yeah, get in touch with his core self. But he'd really have to do some work. I mean, he'd have to work through, go to therapy, perhaps have a creative outlet, for example. So it's not impossible, but in my opinion, he is really kind of climbing an uphill battle here because of the placements and some other things I'm going to go over in his chart. Now, he also has a grand trine that I think I said before, he has a kite, which we've seen before. So it involves Sun and Pluto, but it also involves this grand trine. So there's a grand trine in that the moon is making a trine to his Uranus conjunct Neptune. Those planets are making a trine to his sun. And then the moon, of course, is also making a trine to the sun. So I'm going to talk about the grand trine before I go into the kite. And a grand trine, like I say, a lot of people think um, a grand trine automatically means success or fortune. It could mean that, but you have to really learn how to harness the energy in the right way. A lot of people wind up not necessarily using the energy to their advantage because all this energy just comes so easily to them. It's like it's just this flow of easy energy. And so it doesn't really force them to do anything differently or to think out of the box, if that makes sense. Um, there's nothing that really forces them to grow or to look outside of this. So it's kind of like they're just doing what they've always known, what comes easy to them, what's comfortable. So who I am is the sun, right? It's the identity that we have. What I feel is the moon. And then how I see reality or what I believe is Uranus conjunct Neptune. So, like I said before, in this grand trine, these planets are all backing each other up. They're providing an ease and a flow to one another. They're all in agreement. So that can be great. But a potential downside is that because Uranus and Neptune are involved, someone with a grand trine like this could feel like the rules don't necessarily apply to them, that reality is more flexible than it actually is. Um, they may actually feel like reality is detached and that they are somehow above the rules. So basically, his feelings justify his beliefs. His beliefs justify this identity that he's buried. There's really no planet, like I said before, there's no planet questioning the system or these beliefs that he has, so nothing's going to change. Saturn is not involved at all. So, if Saturn were somehow involved, that would help because it would kind of um, provide him like an internal break, a stopping to actually slow down and look at what's going on. But there's no internal break. So everything is flowing. He's ready to go. And there's nothing stopping him to slow down and to question what he's thinking, what he's doing. Now, where the kite comes in is that the moon is making a sextile to Pluto, as is the Neptune Uranus conjunction. So we see here that Pluto opposing Sun, it's this middle line, it's this tail of the kite. You can kind of see it looks like a kite configuration. So the tail of the kite adds extra pressure to this grand trine. It adds a challenge and a growth point. So all of the energy of this grand trine is going to get funneled through the tail of the kite, which is the Pluto Sun opposition. So I want to give you guys a potential real life example to explain how the energy of this kite could play out for Wade. So let's imagine that Wade is buying a car. Because of the grand trine he has between the moon, the sun, Neptune, Uranus, this is someone who's going to trust his internal sense completely. So he's not really going to want advice from other people about which kind of a car to buy, about what might be the best deal. If something feels right to him, that's enough for him to put his money down. And with Neptune and Uranus in the picture, he could easily say to himself something like, this salesperson is just playing a role. They don't actually understand what they're talking about, or they're just following a script, which a lot of the time they are. But he could also say to himself, rules around money don't really apply to me here. So that's how the grand trine is going to play out. Now, the tail of the kite becomes involved if his son feels at all nervous about making the wrong choice. And remember, his sun is at 29 degrees of Taurus. So something like buying a car, owning a stable possession, I think is going to be high stakes to him. He's going to have a feeling of, I just have to get this right. I can't afford to get this wrong. Um, but because we've established for Wade that Pluto likely wins out in terms of this opposition, he is going to unconsciously flip to Pluto when he starts to get in touch with any shred of nervousness about the decision he's making. So, what is he going to do then? With the car salesman, for example, he's going to want to completely control or dominate the interaction. He may do things like intimidate the salesperson. He may say or do things to unsettle them. He may make them uncomfortable on purpose. So, in other words, the power here is used as a defense mechanism to try and replace the uncertainty of the nervousness of the sun. By the way, when he was waiting for the jury verdict, I think that would have also been a time when he would have been feeling very nervous because, again, someone with a sun at 29 Taurus desperately wants stability of resources and possessions, but he tries so hard to mask the nervousness, and I don't even know that he himself is really in touch with it. So, all we tend to see, unless we look at him really, really carefully, is this very stone cold person who looks like nothing phases him. But meanwhile, I do imagine that internally he's actually quite nervous and really freaking out. So I want to talk about the moon now. So I've talked about how when someone has a planet at 0 degrees of a sign in my other videos, they tend to make a lot of mistakes when it comes to that sign. They're kind of new at the trace associated with the sign, and so they're in effect kind of stumbling. So this would mean a moon at 0 degrees Libra that he may have had some issues in terms of really doing Libra things, but Wade clearly had a lot of luck with being able to manipulate a lot of women. So why is that? So first of all, if this time were correct or approximate, he would also have the Libra rising, which would help. And again, Libra can be quite masterful at manipulating other people, but there's a couple of other things going on for him here. One of which I already talked about. He has Pluto in the first house with the opposition of the sun. So that's going to make him really clever at things like manipulation, controlling others. Venus at 29 Gemini makes him a really smooth talker. And then he does have a yod, which I'm going to talk about, that involves Venus sextile Mars, making it in conjunct to Pluto. So I think he actually has enough going on for him in this chart to kind of override the 0 degrees of Libra. So the moon here, it is sort of, it's on the border of the 11th and 12th house cusps. So I would argue that it may show up in both houses. And I think a moon in the 12th house here for Wade is so important because, first of all, someone who has their moon in the 12th house may be someone who tends not to express what they're feeling outwardly. He could really process things internally. So this gives us additional information about the mask, the tattoos that he has on his face. He really doesn't want people to know what he's feeling and he's thinking. And a lot of that he's not going to show anyway. It's going on very deeply internally for him. A moon in the 12th house could lead to a high potential for escapism. So this may have had something to do with the drug abuse. The moon is also making a square to his Venus. So This also tells me he needs avoidance or escape, but he turns to pleasure or substances for relief. And his 12th house in Libra is ruled by Venus in the ninth. Um, and so this, because it's making a square to the moon here, you know, it could mean that he's overstepping legal boundaries, he's breaking the law by getting his needs met, especially if drugs are involved. Now, interestingly, the moon represents the mother, and Wade was adopted. So, moon in the 12th house could also really indicate a primal sense of abandonment by a maternal figure. He doesn't know where his mother is. There's confusion, there's a lot of fog surrounding that, surrounding the story. And any emotional pain that he's had about that may get pushed underground as well, since it's in the 12th house. I also just want to mention, I think it's interesting that this is the third video I've done in the last couple of weeks where this person was adopted. And by no means am I saying that if you're adopted, it's going to lead to criminal behavior. I just think it's interesting because it's coming up here. It showed up with Michael McKee and it showed up with Ted Bundy. So that's interesting. So with the yod, I'm going to go to the yod now. By the way, I kind of go back and forth between pronouncing it yod and yod. My astrology teacher mentor pronounces it yod, but I've been hearing yod lately. So I'm just gonna refer to it as a yod for now. So with a yod and with an inconjunct in general, so first of all, I'll just show where the yod exists. So his Venus at 29 Gemini, this is making a sextile to the Mars at 27 Aries, and then both of these planets are making an inconjunct to Pluto. So with a yod or with an inconjunct in general, it's like someone is forever trying to master something that they're never going to get quite right the way they want it, but they keep trying. So imagine that you constantly go to your freezer expecting to get ice cream, but all you ever get is salmon. There's no way you can eat salmon and ice cream at the same time. So you have no choice but to adjust. You either have to eat the salmon and be okay with it, or you have to go to the store and buy ice cream, or you could just give up and not have anything. But the inconjunct always requires some kind of sacrifice, and adjustment in terms of having to recalibrate. Now, Venus sextile Mars is really powerful here for him, I think, because this gives him a natural gift of understanding attraction, chemistry, and timing. So again, because the Venus is at 29 Gemini, I'm telling you, he's a smooth talker. This is someone who knows how to draw people in. Also, because Pluto is at the apex here, he's going to be obsessed with romance and sex. This is Venus and Mars. And he's using the sextile energy to his benefit, in terms of charming all these women. So I think it's possible or probable that he used the sextile energy of Mars and Venus to lure Diane Ruiz into his car. But where the inconjunct of Pluto actually comes in is that he could expect to feel a certain level of power or control in a dynamic. So if for whatever reason he's not feeling that level of power that he wanted, or if he, senses that his influence is somehow slipping, he may choose to adjust to the situation by becoming Pluto himself, controlling, dominating, someone who has the potential to destroy someone, for example. Now, the inconjunct becomes even more apparent because his way of gaining control and the upper hand is usually going to cost him. So, for example, with this case, he did something to, be Pluto, to be destructive, to show dominance, to be in control. But by doing that, he wasn't really in control. It cost him his freedom. So that's another thing about an inconjunct. You can keep trying and trying and trying to get what you want the way you think that you want it, but it never really works out in your favor. So that's the other thing here. Every time he tries to gain control, it backfires. He actually loses control, which is really interesting. So I do want to talk about some of the upcoming transits for him. I forgot to mention that in the beginning of the video. Um, but I will put it in the description of my video. So I'm not going to do a quad wheel like I usually would because I really only have a couple things to mention. So most of you probably already see that Uranus is going to be on his sun, which for me means I don't know why I'm on Venus. Okay, Uranus, it's going to be at 29 degrees of Taurus pretty soon. It's already been there, but it's gone back and forth, so it's coming back. So Uranus on his sun for me means he has a pretty big change coming. And the change, because it's Uranus, would be quite sudden. Now I know that he is appealing the court ruling. I don't think this necessarily means that his chances of overturning it are good, although I don't know, that could be what this means. Um, it could also mean he's abruptly moved somewhere else. It could even mean that something happens related to his health, like he has a sudden heart attack, a stroke. He could, you know, I don't know, but he could abruptly die. Maybe be a strangulation, especially because I'm thinking Taurus rules the neck. And then at the end of February, transiting Mars will be at a late degree of Aquarius. So that will also be making a square to his natal sun, which adds extra potential for danger for him, and sun and change as well. Saturn at 0 degrees of Aries, it's also going to be, it is making a square to his progressed sun. I think his progressed sun, if I'm remembering, it's like 0 degrees of Cancer right now. Um, and it's also making an inconjunct to his solar arc moon. Of course, it's also opposing natal moon if it's at 0 degrees of Libra. So he's quite isolated. Now, I will say that in less than a month, his solar arc Venus is going to cross his midheaven. And Venus rules his ascendant if we are going off this birth time. Venus also rules his moon and his sun. So that would be kind of a big deal for him. So I'm wondering if Venus crossing his midheaven or his solar arc Venus, that is, I'm wondering if that also means some big milestone change for him. So with Venus crossing the midheaven, it may mean that he makes big news in some way. He becomes even more publicly known than he already is, for example. Now, on Tuesday or Wednesday with the eclipse, that is also going to be hitting his sun because the sun is going to be at 29 degrees of Aquarius, so it's going to be making a square to his sun. So keep your eyes and ears out because there may be some kind of news developing about him on Tuesday or Wednesday around the time of the eclipse. Also, just fun fact, the day that he was sentenced, Pluto was on his IC, so transiting Pluto. So of course that meant, a major, major change, a major move in terms of his home environment. So let me know what you guys think about the video. I hope that you've enjoyed it and learning more about Wade Wilson's psychology. Let me know. I always ask for requests. Let me know if there's anyone in true crime that you want me to cover. There's been quite a few videos that I've covered, that are based on people's requests. So let me know. I really want to give you guys content that you want. So let me know. Again, if you have liked this video, please like and respond. Let me know what you think. I really, really love hearing from everybody. The support means more to me than you know. So thank you. I'm so grateful, and stay tuned for the next video. Thank you so much for watching.